Well, I'll be addressing the Islamic perspective in particular, and as we know, the cognitive or intellectual faculties that we have are divinely bestowed to Adam alayhi salam, and part of our human nature. This ability to think and understand the world is unique to humanity in the way that we understand because our understanding ultimately is not just restricted to the material world, but ultimately is to be directed towards knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What AI can, the level it can achieve is the level of sort of an instrumental form of intelligent operation. So it can be applied to, very specific tasks in a very narrow context, and it can perform very capably. And it can even give the appearance of having the capacity to think. For example, we've seen the latest conversational agents. They actually have reasoning abilities, as insofar as they're being the technology is being the user interface is being designed and provided to users, showing that there's a reasoning capability. But this is not actually, in reality, a true form of reasoning, because it's not grounded in reality ultimately, and it's still a product of being parasitic on human intelligence. So it's still ultimately, it's just bringing together a huge amount of information and algorithms which are able to operate and, as you mentioned, produce next produce the completion of sequences of words, but to do that very effectively, to the extent that it looks like it's reasoning or thinking, but in reality it's nothing comparable to human thought. Well, the problem with that is the extent to which so AI artifacts are the product of large numbers of individuals contributing towards its production. So the problem from the Islamic perspective is that this is sort of a form of moral outsourcing. That rather than assuming responsibility for the impacts on society directly, AI is that responsibility. It's almost as though people want to absolve themselves of being responsible and hand that over to AI agents. But the reality is that in the Islamic context, that we are accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a very problematic area that really needs a lot of attention, especially as these agents become more and more autonomous and operate independently outside of human guidance for each step of the processes that they perform or are delegated to perform on our behalves. So there's a very great risk of, because especially the type of AI that we have now, the type that's powering ChatGPT, for example, it's not a fully reliable form of software artifact, and it can fail in very problematic ways, and it can produce outputs which could be harmful to users. But ultimately, so there's a very big question about where does the responsibility and accountability lie? Does it go back to the companies producing? Should they be legally accountable and responsible for all of the different effects? But the problem with that is that the idea is for these technologies to be deployed at scale. So how can the current legal institutions keep up with the scale of the way these technologies will be operating in society? So one of the arguments is to just hand over moral agency to attribute moral agency entirely to the artificial agent, which again is problematic. Well, AI already does surpass us in very narrow domains in very many areas, from being able to defeat us in games such as chess and Go to to being able to sift through vast amounts of text or information. It could scan a video, for example, and label every single thing that's in the scene and do a full transcript, in faster than real time actually. So it's already outsurpasses humans in sort of very specific areas. But the question is different so this question is being asked as a broader societal issue, but then also from Muslims need to ask this question as well. But the question, the answers are actually slightly different because for outside the religious context, especially in the secular atheist context, this triggers an existential crisis because if, for example, the creativity and production of art or other forms of cultural artifact, if all of that is, if AI can do a better job than people, then that really does trigger an existential crisis, because for some people that is the being producers of culture is part of their humanity. But for Muslims, in fact, we could see that we would be relieved for our ultimate purpose, because as Muslims we have ultimate purpose, which is to go back to the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So actually, if this technology was completely, free of any problematic areas, such as the way it can be used by powerful actors to sort of manipulate society, if it was free of those particular problems, and also the environmental toll, which is quite significant as well, that this is actually the development of this technology actually aggravates the existing problems, the existing environmental crisis. But if it was, let's say in a very idealistic case, it was free of all of these problems and it did truly relieve humanity to their own devices, then this would be a very wonderful message, because we would be free to spend our time really reading the Quran and worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and stuff, the things which our religion truly calls us to. Yes, again, this is a very complicated question, because its danger emerges in the way it's being used and operationalized in society. So its danger emerges from the way it's being insinuated directly into our lives with very sophisticated capabilities. So whenever as AI increasingly becomes integrated into computational infrastructure, we need to be consciously aware that behind the screen is a huge. It's not. It's called AI, but the reality is it's huge computational infrastructure, which is performing trillions of operations towards particular objectives, and those objectives are set by the designers and producers of the technology. So the danger emerges at that particular interface. One of the key danger, because as I mentioned, it can produce very sophisticated dialogue, intelligible responses to a certain degree, but that language that it produces, it might not always be grounded in reality or factual truth. But what it does do is it produces rhetorical and persuasive styles of speech very, very well. So, for example, if we're using the tool in a conversational interface, or a personified version of an AI agent, it could be slowly undermining our own perspectives about the topics which we're engaging with through that dialogue. So that's one of the dangers that emerges with these technologies. There are other dangers sort of at a larger scale. For example, systems, developing, sort of learning ways to exploit the computational infrastructure which they're built into, and learning those exploits in ways which disrupt critical infrastructure and so on. So that's really a question for nation states, governments to be very careful about the way they integrate this in society, so that we don't become dependent on it. Not just dependent on it in the sense that we are unable to take over from where it fails, but also that its failure modes don't encroach on important areas of society. Let's make an analogy. So a nuclear weapon, for example, it creates mass destruction of the physical world. It can destroy, it can level out an entire city. Whereas this technology, because it's able to produce text and information, at scale, this is like a nuclear weapon for the semantic sphere, you could say, because it can enter different areas of the information ecosystem, and create very vast, large-scale semantic destruction, degrading the quality of information that's out there. Yeah, researchers have already uncovered that there's a phenomenon called latent persuasion. So already, if someone uses a large language model and they enter a dialogue with it, or another type of system, they use a large language model for like autocomplete or smart compose to suggest the next lines of text. So different scenarios, but the effect can be the same, which is that gradually the individual who's using the LLM system can gradually be induced to change their own perspective and adopt the perspective which is being delivered through the AI system. So this is a very subtle way which human thought can be undermined. That's what's already been identified with current large language model systems. But what's very interesting is that this can actually go from a latent mode to an active mode, where the system is specifically designed in such a way to influence thought and opinion. And there's actually an interest in developing such technology. The same in November 2022, when OpenAI released ChatGPT, Meta, formerly known as Facebook, also released an AI proof of concept prototype called Cicero, which was designed for strategic reasoning. So its design was actually to use dialogue to win a board game called diplomacy. So to negotiate, collaborate, and persuade the other users so that it can gain the territory on the board. So you can already see that Meta has an interest in developing these technologies in that direction, to insinuate them and insert them, not just in a one-to-one interaction, but within our social circles and groups. So gradually, you can imagine scenarios where an AI agent is sort of sitting, within group chats, for example, and intervening on those discussions. And some people might say that what the AI says is right, and you can imagine it creating separation and division within those groups. But all of that, as I mentioned, it can be designed with the strategic objectives built into the system itself. Well, I can tell you my own approach in this area, which is to keep a very restricted usage of the technology and to be very careful and conscious about the way I'm using it. So I might use it, for example, to provide me some basic skeleton or boilerplate code, computer code. So for preliminaries or getting started in a different area, it can be very effective, of course. But one of the things I do is I don't indulge the personification or anthropomorphization. This idea that I'm engaging with an entity which has any form of personhood or any aspect of self-awareness or consciousness. I interact with it as I do with other computer systems on computational terms. So I think if some degree of separation can be maintained in the same way that to use them as just very very sophisticated computational tools, rather than bringing them into our lives, befriending us or becoming sources of authority, sources of influence on our lives. That's where all the danger actually emerges.